You feel it? Do you feel the electricity in the air? Because that is the feel of Star Wars season. We are getting these some bitches about every fucking year, and that's a pretty cool thing to have. Whether you be a diehard Star Wars fan or you just like adventure and sci-fi, that's a pretty good thing. But sometimes that could be a bad thing, especially if a movie is not good. Now, let's talk about Rogue One, all right? So, Rogue One has been having a couple of bad problems leading up to this thing. In case you haven't actually heard, it's been reshoots, been rewrites, people brought in, whatever it may be. And let's be real here, in 2016, there's been countless movies that had reshoots, or movies just in general that have reshoots, and they tend to kind of ruin the movie. Now, some people say this could be a cash grab. Is it? Who knows? You know, who knows yet? But after watching this movie, I gotta be honest. This movie, with all the reshoots and all, is it a disaster? Or is it a great fucking film inside the Star Wars universe? I'm telling you this right now, it's pretty fucking cool. Alright, so let's talk about Star Wars Rogue One, alright? So, the thing about Rogue One is just that it's essentially like the best DLC you ever fucking had, right? Anybody remember the game The Last of Us, where The Last of Us pretty much is a fantastic game, and I'm sure the sequel is going to be even better, but Left Behind was a pretty small DLC that kind of filled in the gaps as to what happened right before the fantastic Last of Us game. That's essentially what Rogue One pretty much is. It's essentially a fantastic prequel that really does link up everything well into it and really does make you appreciate the universe that we all kind of love at this very point in time. So that's kind of my point to kind of talk about right now. Now, I think what this movie really does well, unlike kind of the prequels just in general and kind of The Force Awakens, is on two separate merits, right? Just in general. I think when it comes to the prequels, this movie feels like it's actually moving forward and it actually gives you something new to kind of talk about. The prequels kind of was about Vader's story, but even though that sounds like a very cool idea on paper, you essentially didn't really get anything. You had to get through sand, you had to get through countless mining and moping, and Stalker Syndrome, whatever it was, until you became Vader. And then for The Force Awakens, it pretty much fucked you up the ass with nostalgia to the countless references and everything. And it was a movie that was supposed to be the next step in Star Wars, but it felt like it was taking about 6 steps backwards in Star Wars. This is essentially a prequel, which everybody pretty much knows by now, but it takes a few steps and beyond with doing something different. And I feel like this is the only Star Wars movie, probably since the original ones, that I feel like it really does open the universe a lot more bigger, like in comics and video games. I feel like this is the one where I feel like it opens up the universe a little bit more than anything else we've seen other than obviously the original trilogy, just to begin with. Now, to me, I really enjoyed this movie because it feels like a war film. Everybody knows it's kind of like Guardians of the Dirty Dozen, unlike some other movies that kind of came out this year. So I think everything else kind of works very, very well in here. I think the best parts of Rogue One also tend to be sometimes the oldest parts of Rogue One, which is kind of like the countless cameos and some references or throwbacks, whatever it may be. And believe me, there's cameos all in this movie. But it doesn't fuck you up the ass with nostalgia, as I said, with The Force Awakens. I think everybody serves a purpose. Some people are brought back digitally or whatever it may be in a good enough way. Sometimes it does feel forced, but I understand what they're trying to do. They're leading up to what we eventually know. Now, some people say prequels, does it really add anything, even though we know the ending? That's not the problem, we know the ending. The problem would be, how does it get to the ending? And I think this movie has enough twists and turns and fucking space battles and shoot-ups or whatever it may be, and interesting, dialogue discussions with these characters that I think it does a really good job at getting to an ending that we already pretty much knew from the beginning. Now, overall, I think the characters inside of this film are actually pretty much where it's at. I think everybody does a really good job. Granted, I will say my favorites is pretty much, and I'm a little bit biased, is pretty much Donnie Yen because, let's be real here, the guy's the king of China. And he's pretty badass and cool, and everybody's going to be liking his blind kung fu mastery for the most part. And I think everybody's pretty much going to come out of this loving, K2S0 or it's K2SO, whatever, because he has the funniest lines by far inside his entire movie, and he actually made CP3PO look like part woman, which is not that hard to begin with. But overall, Rogue One gives you a lot of callbacks, as I said, but it definitely feels like it's being its own thing. It's not worried about really linking up too much with what eventually happens going forward. It's worried about the story that it's trying to tell. Granted, I did like, Felicity Jones, and I'd have to admit that sometimes she does feel a little bit boring. And I feel like sometimes the characters into this movie, they don't really link up with me that well. I feel like some of them just didn't really connect with me well. And maybe it's because the script also feels like it doesn't really flesh out that many characters. The story moves quick, and I mean it moves right off the bat, and I'm talking about it hits. When it hits, it just keeps going, and it just is a fantastic adventure ride all the way through. But you also have to realize that sometimes it's good to slow down the story in order to allow these characters kind of get fleshed out. Some characters get more fleshed out than others. Others just kind of are having their big moments, but they don't really feel like that fleshed out character, and we may or may not see them ever again. Wink. Who knows? But that's just my simple case. I think Felicity Jones did a good enough job leading the thing, and she's very good in action scenes. But she also is not that well of an interesting character to me compared to some of the other female heroines inside of the Star Wars universe, in my perspective, just to begin with. Now, overall, like I said, I think this movie does have a very dark, gritty tone. I love the set pieces. I love the score. This is a very fantastic film that really does deliver on what you really wanted from a prequel, which is something that gives you a story that you didn't know, because you didn't know about the Rebels. Like, you knew about them, but you didn't know their side of things. And that's what this movie essentially does. It gives you really something to look forward to. And it's essentially going to make you want to just watch the original trilogy again, which is never really a bad thing to begin with. But overall, this movie, even though sometimes the characters aren't really that fleshed out well, and the story does kind of move at a very brick pacing. And Ben Mendelsohn, I thought he was a good villain per se, and others like fine. And Vader is in this shit. Vader is in his thing to the point where Vader actually does what he didn't do in episode 3, which is pretty much be Vader. And that's about as cool as you could possibly fucking imagine. But like I said, there's enough twists and turns inside of this movie that Star Wars fans will fucking love it. And you can't really say much about it except that it definitely feels like a very dark and grounded and different type of movie than any other Star Wars movies. Because we always had Jedis, good guys, bad guys, whatever. But this is something new. This is like a battle. This is a war film. We get a stormtroopers back in the old attire. This feels very nostalgic, but it doesn't beat you over the head with something you already know and doesn't take full advantage of it, which is good. And that's great. But essentially, that's all I can really say about this film. It's just that it gives you something to look forward to. And I feel like it's the only movie since probably the original trilogy that I feel like it really did move kind of forward and doing something completely different. Because there's no Jedi really in here. There's not really non-existent. There's none of the main characters. These are completely fleshed out, as I said before, and that's a good thing. But that is my review. I think Star Wars Rogue One is pretty much a fantastic movie that kind of sometimes suffered from a little bit lackluster characters, and some of them are not that interesting, and sometimes they do have a lot of exposition, and it's very obvious sometimes, but I'll let that slide because the adventure through the film is good enough, and that's the best thing you can really say, and it's a much more mature film compared to The Force Awakens, and I think it's a much more better film if you had to ask me. But I say you should go see it, but then again, what do I know? I'm just a fucking guy in a hat. Comment, subscribe, and like, share this video if you can. I'm Chris Smith, and I'm signing out.